Welcome back to the Silent Husband Club. We know it's been a while since our last story. Thank you for your patience. From now on, we'll do our best to bring you new stories every single day. They say trust is the foundation of love. But what happens when the very person you built your life with begins to drift into secrecy? What happens when warmth turns to silence, and the woman you thought you knew starts feeling like a stranger in your own home? Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means everything and helps keep these stories alive. For 12 years, Emily had been my wife, my partner, and, in many ways, my anchor. I had never once questioned her loyalty or her heart. She was sharp-minded, full of ambition, and carried a sense of humor that could pierce through even the darkest clouds. Life with her wasn't perfect, whose is, but it was ours. Steady. Safe. Or at least, that's what I believed. Some betrayals don't come like storms, they creep in quietly, almost invisible at first. A look, a pause, a silence. That's how it began with Emily. She had always been attached to her phone, but now it was different. Her screen glowed late into the night. She scrolled through messages while we watched television. Notifications flashed during dinner, and she would dismiss them with a quick swipe, mumbling something about just work. I told myself not to worry. She worked in marketing, after all, a field that thrived on late-night emails, sudden crises, and client calls at ungodly hours. But deep down, something started to feel off. She smiled at her phone in ways she never smiled at me anymore. She placed it face down the moment I entered her room, as if the glow itself might betray her. Once, I woke in the dead of night to find her typing furiously, the bluish light painting her face. When I asked, she claimed she couldn't sleep and was checking on a project. It sounded reasonable, but her tone left a shadow inside me. Slowly, she began staying late at the office more often than usual. Once upon a time, she would text or call to let me know if a meeting dragged on. Now she returned home hours later, her explanations vague: deadlines, client emergencies, endless excuses. When I suggested a weekend getaway, a chance to reconnect, she hesitated, her eyes avoiding mine. "Work's crazy right now. Maybe next month," she muttered. The excuses felt thin, but I swallowed them. Relationships go through seasons, I reminded myself. Maybe she was stressed, maybe she was exhausted. Yet even stress couldn't explain the growing distance, the way intimacy faded into excuses, the way the woman who used to greet me with a kiss barely lifted her eyes from her laptop anymore. It was a Thursday night when my unease finally turned into something I could no longer ignore. Emily had gone to bed early, leaving her phone charging on the kitchen counter. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never been the type to snoop. Trust was sacred to me, but something deep inside screamed that the truth was hiding behind that locked screen. My hand trembled as I picked it up. Of course, it was locked, but I knew her code. I had seen her tap it in 1,000 times before. For a moment, I froze, my finger hovering. Did I really want to do this? What if I found nothing? What if I found everything? With a breath that felt heavier than stone, I entered the code and unlocked her world. The screen lit up with her world, and for a moment I almost wished I hadn't looked. At first, everything seemed harmless: casual texts with coworkers, calendar reminders, the usual digital clutter. But then my eyes caught on a thread with someone saved under the name Alex. My chest tightened as I opened it, expecting to see harmless chatter with a friend. Instead, the words that appeared felt like knives pressing into my skin. The messages weren't explicit, but they carried an intimacy that had no place outside a marriage. Jokes layered with private meaning, emojis that hinted at affection, and photographs of Emily taken right in our living room. Poses that weren't obscene, but personal, too personal. Messages like "I miss you tonight" and "wish you were here" glared back at me, pulling the floor from beneath my feet. I scrolled upward, desperate to understand, desperate for something that would explain it all away. But the more I read, the heavier the weight grew. This wasn't her best friend. This wasn't work. This was someone else, someone she wanted close when she should have been with me. My hand shook as I locked the phone again, setting it back on the counter as if it burned. That night I lay in bed beside her, unable to close my eyes. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, as if she carried no burden at all. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts screaming. Who was Alex? How long had this been going on? And why wasn't I enough anymore? I wanted to shake her awake, demand answers, but fear rooted me to the mattress. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to know more. The following days, every small gesture took on new meaning. Every smile at her phone, every hush call behind closed doors, every late night at work sounded like a lie whispered straight to my face. I became hyper-aware, noticing details I'd ignored before: how she lingered in the bathroom with her phone, how she turned her screen away whenever I walked past, how she left earlier for work and returned later than needed. The more I watched, the more certain I became. She was hiding something, and Alex was the shadow in our marriage I couldn't escape. But certainty wasn't enough. I needed proof, undeniable proof, before I tore apart what little foundation we had left. And so, against every instinct of decency I'd once lived by, I crossed a line I never thought I would. I installed a discreet tracking app on Emily's phone. It felt like betrayal, my own betrayal, but I justified it with the gnawing truth in my chest. If she had already broken our vows, wasn't I only trying to uncover the reality she refused to admit? For days, nothing came of it. Her locations were mundane: work, errands, the grocery store. I started to wonder if paranoia had poisoned my mind. But then, one Friday afternoon, the alert came. She wasn't at the office. She wasn't anywhere near the places she had said she would be. Instead, she was at a cafe on the far side of Brookfield, a place I had never heard her mention, a place well out of her usual path. As I stared at the blinking dot on the screen, my heart crashed into my ribs. The truth was no longer something distant, hidden behind codes and excuses. The truth had a location, a time, a place where I could confront it. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I truly wanted to know what I was about to find. I drove to Brookfield that day with a storm raging inside me. The cafe was tucked into a quiet corner of town, far from Emily's office, far from anywhere she had reason to be. I parked across the street and sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My instincts told me to leave, to turn away before I saw something I could never unsee. But the ache in my chest demanded answers, and answers were only a few steps away. Through the wide glass window, I finally spotted her. Emily sat at a small table by the window, her face lit not by the cold glow of a phone screen this time, but by the presence of a man across from her. He was sharply dressed, his posture confident, his expression easy, too easy. They leaned toward each other, laughing quietly, their hands brushing across the table as if my marriage didn't exist, as if 12 years of my life could be erased with a smile and a touch. The sight pierced through me like a blade. My chest tightened, and my throat went dry. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, but nothing prepared me for the real image of her, my wife, looking at another man with the warmth that once belonged only to me. For a brief, reckless moment, I wanted to storm inside, flip the table, and demand the truth in front of every stranger there. But something stronger held me back, the need to understand, to learn who this man was, to know the full depth of the betrayal before I confronted her. So I stayed hidden, a coward in my own story, and I watched. After nearly an hour, they stood and laughed together, walking side by side down the street. She laughed at something he said, tucking her hair behind her ear the way she used to do with me, and I felt my stomach churn. I followed them from a distance, careful not to be seen, and that's when I heard his name. She called him Victor. That single word changed everything. Victor wasn't just a stranger. He was someone I had heard of in passing, a businessman with a polished reputation, a man whose name carried weight in certain circles. But seeing him like this, with Emily, stripped away every illusion of respectability. This was the man she had chosen to confide in, the man who had slipped into the cracks of our marriage while I was too blind to notice. That night, I couldn't sleep. The images replayed in my head relentlessly, her smile, his hand brushing hers, the casual way she said his name. The questions grew louder, darker. How long had this been going on? Was it only laughter and stolen touches, or had it already gone much further? And why Victor of all people? What hold did he have on her that I no longer did? The next days turned into an obsession. I watched more closely than ever, tracking her movements, piecing together her lies, and every detail led back to him. Victor wasn't just an affair. He was a shadow growing larger with every passing day, a threat not only to my marriage but to the very life I thought I had built. And deep down, I sensed that what Emily was entangled in was far darker than secret messages and late nights at the office. Because men like Victor didn't just play with hearts. They played with power. And I had the sickening feeling that my wife had walked straight into something I couldn't yet see, but would soon be forced to face. The days after discovering Victor's name were a blur of restless nights and gnawing suspicion. It wasn't just jealousy anymore, it was dread. Something about him didn't sit right, something that went beyond the fact that he was with my wife. I began digging, pulling at threads wherever I could. A name mentioned here, an article there, whispers about investments that never saw the light of day. And slowly, a darker picture started to form. Victor wasn't only stealing wives, he was stealing lives. It was almost ironic when the next piece of truth came not from my own search, but from someone I least expected. One evening, I got a call from Helen, Victor's ex-wife. The voice on the other end was steady but carried a quiet bitterness, the kind that only comes from betrayal that is cut deep. She asked to meet, said it was important, said it was about Victor. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When we met in Riverside Park, near the old oak, Helen looked nothing like the woman I'd imagined. She wasn't broken, not anymore. She was resolved, her eyes sharp, her posture firm. And when she spoke, her words confirmed every suspicion I had. Victor had been cheating her not only as a husband, but as a businessman. Affairs, lies, fraudulent investments, his trail of destruction stretched further than either of us could measure. Sitting across from her, I realized something unsettling. Emily wasn't just caught in an affair. She was tangled in Victor's web, a web that reached far beyond personal betrayal. Helen laid out documents, emails, fragments of evidence she had been gathering since her own divorce, and the picture they painted made my stomach churn. This wasn't simply about love lost, this was crime, calculated and deliberate. Part of me wanted to push it all away, to pretend it wasn't my problem, that Emily's choices were her own to live with. But another part, the part that had been clawed open by her lies, felt a pull toward vengeance. If Victor thought he could use my wife and discard her like another pawn in his schemes, he was gravely mistaken. Helen looked at me and asked, almost carefully, "Do you want to see him fall?" Her words hung in the air like a dare. For a long moment, I didn't answer. I thought about Emily's laughter at that cafe, the secret messages hidden in her phone, the hollow way she kissed me goodnight without even meeting my eyes. And then I thought about Victor's smug confidence, the way men like him thought they could bend the world to their will without consequence. "Yes," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "I want him to pay." From that night on, Helen and I became unlikely allies. Two strangers bound not by affection, but by betrayal, by the hunger to see justice or revenge delivered. And as we began to gather evidence, as we planned the steps that might finally bring Victor's empire of lies crashing down, I realized something chilling. I wasn't just fighting to uncover my wife's affair anymore. I was stepping into a much larger war, one that could destroy more than just my marriage. Working with Helen was like walking a razor's edge. Every conversation, every meeting, carried the weight of two lives torn apart by the same man, but also the danger of being caught in his shadow. We began to piece together Victor's empire of deceit, shell companies, falsified contracts, investors lured by promises that never materialized. It was a house of cards, but built with enough arrogance to last years without crumbling. And all the while, Emily was still tied to him, unaware or unwilling to see the depth of the man she'd chosen. I found myself split in two. At home, I played the part of the husband who suspected but had no proof, biting my tongue when Emily offered excuses that no longer sounded convincing. In secret, I dove deeper with Helen, spending late nights combing through files, connecting dots, and building a case strong enough to crush Victor. The secrecy ate at me. I hated being a spy in my own marriage, but the bitter truth was that Emily had pushed me here. Her silence and deception had forced me into shadows I never wanted to step into. The first real blow came one evening when Helen handed me a USB drive. Her eyes were steady, but her voice was taut with urgency. "This is it," she said. "Emails, bank transfers, proof of embezzlement. Enough to bury him if we're careful." I held the small piece of plastic as if it were dynamite, because in many ways it was. It wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon. But weapons attract attention, and Victor was not the kind of man who surrendered quietly. It didn't take long for him to sense something. A message appeared on my phone from an unknown number late at night. "I know what you're doing. Walk away, or you'll regret it." My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen, the threat pulsing like poison in my veins. For the first time, it struck me how far this could go. Victor wasn't just a cheat, he was dangerous. By stepping into his world, I had invited danger straight into my own. Still, I couldn't stop. The betrayal of Emily burned too deeply, and the thought of Victor walking free, smug and untouchable, was more than I could stand. Helen and I pressed forward, enlisting the help of a lawyer who specialized in financial crimes. With his guidance, our pile of evidence began to take the shape of a case strong enough to withstand the storm Victor would surely unleash. Each meeting, each document, was a small strike against a man who thought himself untouchable. But even as progress was made, the weight of my private life grew heavier. Emily carried on as if nothing was wrong, smiling at her phone, vanishing into late nights that reeked of lies. I no longer confronted her, not yet. Part of me wanted to wait until Victor himself fell, until the foundation she had chosen to stand on collapsed beneath her. Only then, I thought, would she understand the full scope of her betrayal. Every night I stared at her across the dinner table, wondering if she had any idea of the storm building around her lover. And every night I wondered how much of her heart was still hers, and how much had already been sold to him. The fuse was lit, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all exploded. The end came faster than I expected, though it had been building for weeks. One cold morning, my phone rang. The lawyer's voice on the other end carried the weight of finality. "Richard, we've got enough. We're filing charges today. Victor's empire is about to collapse." For a moment, I didn't breathe. I had imagined this day endlessly, dreamed of the satisfaction of watching him fall. But when the moment finally arrived, the feeling wasn't triumph. It was exhaustion. It was emptiness. The news spread quickly. Within days, Victor's name was splashed across headlines, his fraudulent empire exposed for all to see. Investors turned into victims overnight, and authorities began tearing apart the image of a man who had thought himself untouchable. Emily couldn't hide from it. I still remember the look on her face when the story broke, the shock, the panic, the sudden recognition that the man she had chosen over me was nothing more than a con artist. She tried to explain, tried to insist she hadn't known, but by then her words meant nothing. Her lies had already burned everything between us to ash. Catherine, my ex-wife, crumbled under the weight of the truth. I heard through whispers that she had lost nearly everything she tied to Victor. And though some part of me wanted to feel vindicated, I didn't. All I felt was tired. Tired of betrayal, tired of watching the people I once trusted unravel before my eyes. Helen and I met again at the park, under that same oak where we had first conspired against him. This time, the air felt lighter, though the scars remained. "It's over," she said softly, and I could see in her face the same strange mixture that haunted me, relief laced with sorrow. We had won, yes, but victory in battles like these never feels clean. Too much is lost along the way. That night, I walked through the silence of my house, every room echoing with memories that no longer belonged to me. I thought about the man I had been before all this, trusting, hopeful, blind. That man was gone. What remained was someone harder, someone who had stared betrayal in the face and survived it. But survival doesn't mean healing. It only means you're still breathing. I began slowly rebuilding a life of my own, packing away the remnants of a marriage that no longer existed, focusing on the small routines that grounded me. I even started writing, pouring my story onto paper as a way of bleeding out the poison that had been festering in me for too long. Some nights it helped. Other nights the silence felt heavier than ever. But perhaps that's what moving on really is. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to live with it, to shape it into something that doesn't define you. Victor was gone. Emily was gone. The past was gone. And though the future stretched before me uncertain and lonely, it was mine to face, free from the lies that had shackled me for so long. I had lost a wife, lost trust, lost years I could never reclaim. But I had gained something too, the clarity of truth, the freedom to start again, and the hard-earned strength to never ignore the quiet whispers of doubt again. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, shocked you, or simply made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, your thoughts, your story, your truth. Subscribe for more raw, real, and unforgettable confessions. And if this story made you feel seen, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. You're not alone here. This channel is a safe space for those who've been betrayed, broken, and rebuilt.